Welcome back to Final Fantasy. As you may recall, we are currently in the Marsh Cave, off to get the crown for a king that we haven't met, because we skipped that part for reasons that were elaborated previously. Just a little quick recap there for anybody who forgot or who's here for the first time. Anyway, previously, last time I talked about various stories and my history with the Final Fantasy series, and I said I was going to resume that today, but a bit of a change of plans, because around the time, or between the time of the previous episode and this one, I played through a fan remake of this game that came to my attention called Final Fantasy Renaissance, which is a fascinating remake somebody made in the Unity engine. In the Unity engine, they basically took the original Final Fantasy, rebuilt it from the ground up, and then added a whole bunch of new features. Some of them are just quality of life changes, like being able to dash outside of battle so you can get around quicker, being able to purchase 99 or up to 99 items at once to speed up buying stuff, because normally in this game you can only buy one item at a time. So if you're trying to purchase heal potions, then you need like 80, 90 heal potions. You have to keep clicking the A button. You have to click buy, click the potion, click yes, click buy, click the potion, click yes. So that's nearly 200 nearly 300 button presses that you'd have to do if you want to buy 99 heal potions in the normal game. This patch that I'm using made it a little easier, because you can buy items in groups of 5 or 10, I think it is. It's been a while since I've looked at it myself even. But that speeds up the item buying a little bit. But the Renaissance mode made it that you can just select how many items you want to buy when you do that. They also added things like spell descriptions, so you can actually see what the spells do, detailed information about weapons and armors to know what types of elemental resistances they have, their critical hit rates with weapons and stuff like that. But the most significant change they made, which is what we'll be talking about today, is in addition to giving the old jobs new special abilities, they also added new jobs. There's a total of 10 new jobs in the game currently, and I believe the person is planning to add more eventually. I don't know when that will happen or how long that will take. I really don't even know how long the Renaissance game has existed, or how long it's been in development. I don't have any of that kind of information. I just saw somebody else playing it online, and then I decided to give it a shot myself. And I did thoroughly enjoy it. It was fun. It was a fun remake. They added some really neat things. But I feel like, having played through it a couple times, if I wanted to play the original Final Fantasy, I would still rather stick with the original. Now, why is that? First of all, the quality of life changes are nice and everything, but I can do without. I'm old school enough when it comes to games that while quality of life changes can be appreciated, they're not necessary. They're not the kind of thing I need in order to enjoy the experience. Furthermore, and more significantly, is... So one of the big things they changed is they added, like I said, they added new abilities. They added a skill command in battle, and they gave a lot of the jobs special abilities that they could use. For example, the thief can now actually steal. The black belt, I believe, has chakra and key abilities. And once you get further into the game, the red mage can shift their magic points around to other spell levels to make them a bit more, so you can relegate magic points you're not using to other spells pretty much. And they also gave a lot of the job's passive abilities as well, like the red mage now has higher accuracy with his status effect spells, whereas the black mage has more inherent damage that he deals with his spells. And all of the new jobs they added have those kinds of abilities as well. And they also added limit breaks that unlock once you get far enough into the game. And for people not familiar with the terminology, a limit break is just a super powerful attack that you can perform. And in this game, how they work, unlike other RPGs or Final Fantasy games where usually you can charge up your limit break bar and then use your limit break after it's filled, in this game you have one limit break use until you rest at an inn. Anyway, the point I'm getting at is, if I want to play the original Final Fantasy, I don't want all that extra stuff. One of the things that draws me to this game is the simplicity. The simplicity of the battles in particular, and the kind of strategy that is required in order to progress, utilizing things like resource management and planning around things like ineffective attacks and the simplicity of the battle system. Those are the kinds of things that I want out of this particular game. If I want something more complex with a job system in mind, or not in mind, but utilized, I will instead play Final Fantasy III or Final Fantasy V. That being said, one thing I've always wanted in this game... I'm gonna have to adjust the volume. This is still a bit too loud, but I'm already too far into this. One of the things... where was I? I got off track because I was just looking at something on the recording and got sidetracked. Alright. One of the things I always wanted in this game was more jobs. The game doesn't need more jobs. The 6 jobs that are available to you pretty much provide you with everything you need. You have your tanky fighter, you have your fighter who's, I don't know, not necessarily stronger, but an alternative fighter in how he can his characteristics can open up inventory space, and how his power comes more from hitting multiple times rather than just pure raw damage with his hits. You have your character who's good at bailing you out of tight spots by being proficient at running away. You have your white mage, your black mage, and then you have your jack of all trades in the red mage. So the game doesn't really need more jobs. 6 jobs isn't very much, but it gives you everything you really need. But, especially having played this game as many times as I have, I've always kind of wished that there were more jobs, because as much as I enjoy revisiting this game, it does get kind of boring having to use the same jobs over and over again, and it's difficult to come up with different party makeups to help make the game a little bit more interesting, especially since I'm not too big a fan of using multiples of the same job class in my party, although I have done that before. For example, I would like to be able to, say, have a team of all magic users without needing to have any duplicates, but with only 3 magic users that's impossible. And the Renaissance fixes that by having several magic users and several fighters, so there's more diversity and there's more you can do with it. But the addition of skills, limit breaks, passive abilities, and there's also world abilities that the characters can have, which are abilities that you can use outside of battle. Things like the fighter can scream at people to get them out of the way. The thief can find hidden items on the map. The trainer, which is one of the new job classes, if you have the trainer at the front of your party, you have a higher likelihood of encountering rare monsters when you get in random battles. But I don't want all of that. I want just the vanilla experience, but with more job classes. And I'm sure there's stuff like that exists, but even ROM hacks usually go a bit too far for my liking with all the quality of life changes or rebalancing things or all that stuff that they tend to do, or just completely changing the game entirely. So that got me wondering, what would I want out of the new jobs that the Renaissance mode added? Or not Renaissance mode, the Renaissance remake. What would I want out of those jobs? And that's what I thought would be an interesting topic to discuss, is looking at all 10 of the jobs that were added in the Renaissance game and basically applying them to the vanilla experience of Final Fantasy. That means no skill commands, so no extra abilities like the thief's ability to steal or the monk's chakra abilities, no passive abilities, and no world abilities, but still providing these new job classes in some capacity. So, I keep getting distracted because I think I set the audio a bit too high for the recording, because it keeps peaking when it probably shouldn't. But I'm gonna keep going at this point. At this point, I'm too far in, so I just hope it's not too much of a problem when actually putting all this together. Getting back on topic, that's what I'm going to be talking about. I want to discuss that. Basically, I'm going to be taking the 10 jobs that were added in the Renaissance game and converting them into the vanilla experience. So no special skills, no limit breaks, and no passive or world abilities. That also means taking away all of the new abilities, characteristics, and traits added to the 6 standard jobs. They're just vanilla, and they are what they are in the normal game. That also means that, like I said, that's taking out all the additional commands and everything. So, if you're familiar with the standard game and I don't mention those in any way, then just, or if you're familiar with the Renaissance game and I don't mention anything about those newly added commands or abilities, then just assume that they're just cut out entirely, because that's what we're going for here. To start things off, let's start with the Evoker, because I have nothing to say about the Evoker, because I have no experience with it. It's the one job of the 10 new jobs that were added that I know nothing about. I've seen some people talk about it, and I read the description of it on the website, so I have some idea of what it does, but I don't know enough about it to give any thoughts. I've beaten the Renaissance twice myself, one on the standard game and one on New Game Plus, which makes the enemies stronger, but also provides some caveats to the player to make the experience a little bit more balanced with the strengthened enemies in mind. And I also watched the Let's Play that introduced me to the Renaissance game. From all three of those playthroughs, the only job that I have no exposure to is the Evoker. So I have no thoughts about that, but if any of you have played the Renaissance game, if any of you know about the Evoker, then I would be interested to see what your thoughts are about how it could be worked into the vanilla game based on the criteria I have set and the examples I give with the other job classes. So with the Evoker out of the way, let's move on to the first real entry, which is the Time Mage. The Time Mage, for those who aren't familiar with the Renaissance game, is basically an alternative Black Mage. They learn Black Magic, have similar stats, I believe, to the Black Mage, but they learn different black spells. They learn all of the time-based black spells like Stop, Slow, and some other ones. But then they also learn a bunch of their own unique spells created for the Renaissance game, like the Mark spell, which places marks on the enemies, and then every time the enemies either get hit by the Mark spell or they get hit by a basic attack, they then take damage equal to the number of marks placed on them. And they also learn, like, Teleport. They learn a couple attack spells, like some time elemental attack spells, and non-elemental attack spells like Comet and Meteo. So, they're just an alternative Black Mage. And aside from the aforementioned removal of any skills, limit breaks, and world abilities and passives, I don't think the Time Mage would really need to be changed at all, because at the end of the day, that's all it really is. Just an alternative Black Mage that learns different spells from the Black Mage. So if you want a character who is more technical or a little bit more of a damage / support, he's not really so much dealing his own damage as much as he's debilitating enemies and perhaps improving damage dealt by other characters in unique and interesting ways. One of my favorite things to do, actually, with the Time Mage, going a little bit off topic, but one of my favorite things to do with the Time Mage was to cast Mark on the enemies, that spell I just mentioned, and then confuse the enemies. So now the enemies are not only beating themselves up, but each time they do hit each other, they're dealing more damage because of the combination of the Mark spell being added on top of them being confused. So that was a fun little combination I came up with. Perhaps let that be a hint or something if you're considering playing the Renaissance game and are considering using a Time Mage. Throw them in with a Black Mage or a Red Mage to be able to confuse the enemies and combine those powers to wreak havoc on your enemies. Or wait until you get the Wizard Staff over halfway through the game to confuse enemies that way, just improving the effectiveness of confusion through that. I found it to be really effective anyway. Perhaps The one thing I might consider changing, though, with the time mage would be to give his... hang on. Got a burp there. But I would but one of the skills with the time mage is double cast. Once you get far enough in the game, he can make it so other characters in the party can cast 2 spells a turn. And I would maybe consider giving him that in place of one of his other spells. So instead of it being a skill that he could just freely use infinitely, I would make it one of his spells, although I'm not sure which of his standard spells I would consider replacing or what level I would put that on. But it's just something to consider. Next up, we have the Lancer. And the Lancer or Dragoon is something anybody who's familiar with Final Fantasy would already understand. He's a strong fighter, similar to the fighter class, but instead of using swords, he uses spears. And he can jump, removing him from battle for 1 turn, and then the next turn he comes down and hits the enemies for extra damage. In the case of this game, they made it so jumping on enemies just scores guaranteed critical hits. And that's how they accomplished it, doing increased damage. And that's all it really does. So, with the Lancer, this one I was thinking a bit about, and I feel like I would take the Lancer and make him sort of a mix between the fighter and the black belt. Similar defenses to the fighter, he would be able to use a lot of heavy armor, although I think I would still make all of the endgame opal armor exclusive to the fighter. Just keep that the fighter's thing for maximizing defense at the end of the game. But other than that, I think I'd make the Lancer able to use all heavy armor in the game. But one of the key things would be the lances. I would make the lances function differently than most other weapons. They would not, like, in comparison to the fighter's swords and axes, the lances would be exclusive to the Lancer, only job that can equip them, and statistically, I would make it so their attack power is lower than swords, but they have very high hit percentage, increasing the Lancer's ability to hit things. So they get more hits when they attack, making their damage output, or the source of their damage, similar to the black belt, but with heavier armor than the black belt. But also that means making them more reliant on weapons and armor than the black belt. And I would have to maybe find some way to rebalance them statistically, and that's something I don't really have much input on. I don't know enough about game design or how to adjust stats to make the jobs balanced. Like, I'm not sure if it would be worth balancing out the Lancer's hit points or strength in any way to balance it out as sort of a in-between of the fighter and black belt's abilities, or if having stats play out in a certain way would result in him making the black belt and the fighter redundant, since he would be kind of a mix of both of them. That I don't know. Hang on a second, I'm gonna do a thing. There, hopefully that will fix the audio a bit, because it kept peaking, and that was really distracting. So hopefully that will fix it from here on out. Alright. So, yeah, I was talking about the balance thing. I don't know enough about the game design or anything to be like, oh hey, do this with the Lancer stats to bounce him out. I don't know how that would work. And that's not what I'm here to discuss. I'm not here to make the jobs balanced. I'm just here to propose how I would like to see them without all their fancy new things. I would also consider giving the Lancer jump as a spell. That's another thing I considered in regards to it. Having it be a level 1 spell that he just starts with. So you can use it, so many amount of times. I would still make it do the same thing, just a single hit on an enemy that takes a couple turns to perform, and it does a guaranteed critical hit. He also gets a super jump ability later in the game that is just jump on all enemies. And once you get to the point where that can be acquired, I would maybe consider that being a level 2 spell. He wouldn't get very many magic points though, especially for that. But just keeping those in there, especially in the spirit of what the Lancer is supposed to be, and also to help distinguish him a little bit more from the fighter and the black belt, so he's not just like a mix of those two. Hang on, I'm having some trouble with something. Sorry about that, my water bottle was having some technical difficulties. I'll let your imagination fill in the blanks as to what that could possibly mean. Getting back to it, though, where was I? Alright, we just talked about the Lancer. Next up on the list is the trainer, or the beast tamer, or beast master, or whatever it's called based on what game you're playing or what translation of a game you're playing. Just another returning job. All of these are returning jobs from one Final Fantasy game or another. None of them are things that the creator of Renaissance just made up on his own. Now, in Renaissance, the trainer is just an average strength fighter who can control monsters. He can take control of monsters and then utilize their commands in battle instead of doing his own thing. It's kind of like a more powerful version of Confusion by taking up the trainer's turn to command the monster to do things, but it can only be affecting one monster at a time. And also, if the only monster remaining in a battle is a controlled one, you win the battle automatically, and even gain some bonus experience points. Now, obviously, like I said, we're removing skills, removing all that stuff, so the trainer would no longer be able to control monsters. So I was thinking, what would I do with the trainer then? And, one of the things, in my version of the game, the trainer would be statistically similar to the thief. Lower luck, so he doesn't completely steal the thief's proficiency of running, but still higher luck than most other job classes. He would have good luck, but just lower than the thief, but higher than almost everything else. And all of his other stats, like his strength, vitality, and agility, would all be similar to the thief. But he wouldn't get any of the other added abilities that the thief gets later on. He would stay just a simple fighter, and that's it. The thing that would make it unique, however, is his weapon of choice, which are whips. The trainer uses whips, and all these weapons would obviously need to be added. The whips, the lances, whatever other unique weapons might belong to certain job classes. These would all obviously need to be added to the game to make all of this work. And in the Renaissance game, the whips are just generic weapons that I believe increase the probability of the trainer being able to control monsters with his special ability. Obviously, we can't do that. So, I was thinking that the trainer could be used to fill a gap that I always felt existed in this game. Throughout the game, there are several enemies that have basic attacks that inflict various status ailments. There are enemies that can punch you and put you to sleep, or bite you to cause poison. There are no weapons like that in this game, so the player has no such equivalent with their own abilities. So I was thinking, give that to the trainer and his whips. The trainer would also probably be able to use knives and daggers, which might be more damage or might be more hits. I'm not sure how that would work out. Basically, I say basically too much. But basically, the trainer would use his whips to inflict status effects with his basic attacks. Early on, maybe have a whip where you hit an enemy and the enemy becomes poisoned. Or you hit an enemy and they fall asleep. And then later on in the game, like mid-game, have whips that inflict stronger status effects like paralysis and confusion. And then maybe even give him some endgame weapons that inflict multiple status effects, like a whip that can both poison and paralyze an enemy. And stuff like that. Maybe even have one that has a very low chance of causing instant death near the end of the game. But aside from that, they wouldn't be very strong. Rather low attack power, stronger obviously than a mage, but not as strong as other weapons like swords. But good hit percentage, probably a little bit higher hit percentage than a lot of other weapons, but obviously keeping them still lower than the Lancer's weapons. I guess that's it. Just that would be the trainer. It's a lot easier to have these ideas in my head than it is to put them into words. So that's what I would do with the trainer. Make him a relatively weak fighter, so his hits don't do much, and he's not as tough as some of the other fighter jobs, but he compensates by being able to debilitate enemies through means other than just doing damage. He hits them, does a little bit of damage, but then also debilitates them or weakens them with status effects stacked on top of his basic attacks. And also being a good alternative to the thief if you want somebody who's reliable at getting you out of dangerous situations by running away, but not as proficient as the thief in that regard. But a good, probably a second best runner in the game. Give me a moment, I will be right back. Okay, I have returned. And next up on the list for the Renaissance jobs, we have the Dark Knight. Now, the Dark Knight is an interesting one because another fighter class, he learns some black magic, some standard black spells like Sleep and Bane, but also some unique spells that only he learns like Bio and Drain. And they're mostly utility spells. He doesn't really learn any big damage spells or real powerful status effect spells. 9 times out of 10, you're just going to be hitting stuff with his giant sword. And the Dark Knight's swords differ from the fighter's swords because they have a really high damage but really low accuracy. And that said, aside from, again, dropping all of the passives and skills and all that, I don't really think I would change the Dark Knight. I would improve his level ups, because the Dark Knight's level ups are really bad sometimes. Sometimes he gains only like 1 stat. But that's because he gets an ability later on in the game that allows him to just stockpile a ton of stats without needing to level up. He can basically go around and eat bats that are found around the world and permanently increase his stats from that. And so to compensate for that ability he acquires, he sometimes gets really bad level ups. So I would improve his level ups in compensation of no longer having world abilities or anything like that, so he would no longer be able to eat bats to get stronger. He would just get better level ups. But aside from that, I wouldn't really change him, because he does everything he needs to, and that's that. He'd just be another fighter, but instead of having a bit more of a balance between accuracy and damage, he would have really high damage but low accuracy, so he doesn't hit very many times, and especially early on he misses very frequently. But when he does hit, he can dish out a lot of damage, and he also provides some utility and supportive spells if you need them. You won't be using them very often, but you have that option available to you during the rare instances when they may be useful. And I don't really have anything else to say about the Dark Knight, really. That's all there would really be to it, because I don't think he would really need to change much, because he has everything he needs outside of skills. Whereas with the last 2 fighters, the Lancer and the Trainer, most of what made them unique were their skills and their special abilities. But because those are being dropped completely, they needed something more to make them matter. The Dark Knight doesn't need more to make him matter. He's got everything he needs, in a standard sense. meaning we can move right on to the next job on the list, which is the Bard. The Bard is interesting. I actually really liked the Bard, but it also very much epitomizes one of my main issues with the Renaissance game, which is how it alleviates resource management in an unwelcome fashion. One of my favorite things about the original Final Fantasy is the resource management and how a lot of the difficulty comes not from the battles themselves, but getting through the battles in a way that is efficient and getting to the end of these really long dungeons without wearing out your resources. In fact, many of the bosses in this game are not difficult enemies whatsoever. On their own, they are tougher than normal. Actually, they're not even necessarily tougher than normal battles. They're stronger than normal enemies, but they're not always necessarily tougher than the normal battles you fight along the way to reach them. Especially if you encounter a large group of enemies that can all blast your party with spells that will end you before you even get a chance to do anything. But that doesn't mean they're not dangerous encounters, because by the time you reach the boss in a dungeon, you're typically tapped out. You're on your last leg, you have almost no potions left, you spent almost all your spells, and you need to figure out, how am I going to deal with this boss now with so little resources left? Not to mention, in order to get to the end in the first place, you had to be considering how to use your resources wisely. You can't just get in a battle, blast them with your strongest spells, and then move on, because then you'll run out of those spells, and then you won't have enough resources left to get to the end. So every single battle, you can't just consider, what's the most effective way I can win this battle? You have to consider, what's the most effective way I can win this battle while still having enough resources left to handle the battles yet to come. And that's one of my favorite aspects of this game, but a lot of the Renaissance game takes away from that, and the Bard is one of the prime examples of that because of how his magic works. The Bard has 1 magic point for every level, eventually 2 magic points, but for much of the game just 1, and casting any spell for any level uses all the magic points for that level. But he has a command that allows him to restore his magic points in battle, and also on top of that, at the end of battle, his magic points restore. So every single so it's not just 1 magic point and that's it. It's 1 magic point per battle. And I don't like that, because it means that I can use the Bard to his maximum potential, to his maximum proficiency every fight. I don't have to consider when to do what, when it's best to do certain things, what battles to use certain spells and what battles to not use certain spells, because you can just do your best every fight. And that's also a problem I have with some of the future remakes of this game, because they replaced the level system with the magic points with just standard magic points, which allows you to use certain spells way too often, or makes it so you don't have to consider what level of spells you're using, so you're conserving magic points for one level by using a spell for a different level instead. But that's going a bit off topic. But the point is, when you can use a spell every battle without consequence, it takes away from that resource management, because you're no longer needing to concern yourself with conserving yourself. So, with the Bard, the main thing I would do is fix that. I would make it so all of his spells are now standard spells, first of all. Normally, with his spells, once he uses a spell, that's what he's doing. He'll be playing the song on his harp, and he can't really do anything else. He can use his command to replenish magic points and then use more songs while keeping the song going, so you can get multiple songs going at once. But if you have him say use an item or use a basic attack, his songs will end and so too will their effects. So he's kind of limited in that sense that you're basically sacrificing a party member more or less in order to have him providing a buff rather than participating more directly in the battle, so to speak. So instead of having a real team of 4, it's more like you have 3 characters and then a guy who sits there and protects them or makes them stronger. But I would ditch that. I would make all of his songs just standard spells. You cast the spell, and then its effect is active. That's it. And also standard magic points. So you just have a certain number of casts per level. And once you run out of those casts, you're out of them until you can get the chance to either use a house or rest at an inn. Thus fixing the problem of the bard that gets him around the resource management aspect of the game. I would still keep all of his same spells though, and still keep the whole there's the crown, we just got that, so now we're finally done in the Marsh Cave. But I would keep, what am I trying to say? I would still keep it so the bard's spells are all the same things that they already are. He normally has just 1 spell per level for a total of 8 spells. I would keep it like that. But I would make the spell so once you cast it, the spell is cast like any other supportive spell. They would just cast buffs on the party that do whatever effect. And you wouldn't have to sit there and commit to the song. You could then have the bard do other things. But they would have limited magic points that don't just replenish every battle, so you don't have to consider the entire dungeon in planning out your strategies. Which, like I just said, is one of my favorite aspects of this game. As opposed to a lot of other RPGs, where you usually have so many resources that you can just use your strongest things every fight and not have to worry about it. Especially since there will oftentimes be like the save point or a heal spot or something right before a boss, so regardless of how you go through a dungeon, you'll still be able to fight the boss at maximum strength anyway. And that's how I felt playing the Renaissance game, because of things like how the bard's magic points replenish, or how skills don't really have a cost, like the Lancer's jump, or the trainer's ability to control monsters, or the Dark Knight's Soul Eater ability, or whatever it's called, which is just a massive magic blast that hits all enemies. There's no cost to these, so you can just use them every battle. And that ruins so much of this game. And that's a large reason why I would like to, or why I got to wondering how to reimagine the Renaissance jobs in the vanilla experience. Speaking of which, the next job is the Dancer. And the Dancer has the exact same problem as the Bard. The only difference is the Dancer doesn't use magic points. She still learns 1 spell per level, which I would keep. But instead of magic points, she has a bravery system. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention real quick about the Bard is the Bard's harp weapons. When you do a standard attack, they're super weak, but they hit all enemies and can't miss. I would keep that. I would just keep the harp weapons how they are. Group attacks that hit all enemies, but super weak, like even weaker than the Black Mage weak. I forgot to mention that, so I just wanted to backtrack to that real quick before getting onto the Dancer too deeply. Now the Dancer, like I just said, has the same problem as the Bard, which is infinite resources. Especially because she also learns like healing spells, so you can constantly restore your hit points and add so much longevity to your party that detracts from what makes this game an enjoyable experience. But how the Dancer works is the Dancer doesn't have magic points. Instead, she has a bravery system, where she has a stat exclusive to herself called bravery, and it's represented by a percentage. When she performs basic attacks, she builds up her bravery. It also has a standard value. It starts at the beginning of every battle, which I believe gradually increases as you level up. But you can also get more bravery by just performing basic attacks. And every time you use a dance, it consumes bravery. And the dances can fail if bravery is below 100%. And then if the bravery is above 100%, the more above 100% it is, the more proficient or more powerful certain dances can become. I would ditch that. I would keep, just like the Bard, I would keep all of her weapons and stats and everything the same, but I would just replace the bravery system with standard magic points, so she doesn't have unlimited resources, thus ruining so much of what makes me even want to play the original Final Fantasy, as opposed to just playing a different Final Fantasy that doesn't have that resource management aspect, because if I didn't want that resource management aspect, I wouldn't be playing Final Fantasy 1. I would be playing Final Fantasy 3 or Final Fantasy 5 that have some resource management, but not to this extent. And so much of it can just boil down to that. Next up, we have the Blue Mage. For those of you who are familiar with Final Fantasy, you already know what a Blue Mage is. Hang on. And for those of you not familiar with Final Fantasy, a Blue Mage is another magic user, but they learn spells from enemies. The Blue Mage gets hit by an enemy attack, then they learn that as a spell. Aside from the mandatory removing skills, removing limit breaks and all that, I don't think I would need to change the Blue Mage. I do think... Oh, that reminds me about the Bard and the Dancer. They learn their songs and dances by talking to people in towns who teach them to them. The Dancer talks to dancers in towns and learns dances. The Bard can talk to people and get access to special lore that he uses to craft his songs. I would keep that as well. Instead of having to buy them as not normal spells, I would keep that element of them. That you would learn their dances and songs by talking to particular individuals in towns, and sometimes having to meet certain criteria as well. Like one of the dances near the end of the game, you have to pay someone a ton of money in order for her to teach it to you. And I bring that up because one thing they did with the Blue Mage to learn certain spells, especially because some of the spells would be really, really weak and useless by the time you can get them naturally in the game, they added people in towns and caves and such that you could talk to, and they would have you do a pet battle against their pet monster so you could learn certain blue spells, and a lot of blue spells could be learned this way. Especially really weak ones that would be useful at the beginning of the game, but by the time you can normally fight the monster that would use it, you're past the point where that spell would still be useful for you. So I would keep that. But aside from that and the mandatory removal of skills, limit breaks and all that, I don't really think the Blue Mage would really need to be changed. He's fine as he is. Much like the Dark Knight. I feel like the only thing that would need to be done is adding those pet battles in order to learn the spells at points in the game when they can be useful, particularly the really weak ones, that you wouldn't be able to otherwise get until halfway through the game when they're well past the point of being useful. Next up, we have the Green Mage. And the Green Mage is an alternative White Mage. They don't learn the Harm spell. They don't learn any offensive or status effect spells. No Harm spell, no Mute, nothing like that. And they also don't learn any direct healing spells. They don't learn the Life spell. They don't learn Cure. They do learn a Regen, though, which heals hit points over time, which over time will heal more hit points than a standard Cure spell, but it could take several turns to do that. Here we are delivering the crown to the king, but oh no, it's a trap! He is actually the evil elf Astos, and he has Matoya's crystal, and now he wants the crown and is going to try to kill us. But we're gonna beat the crap out of him, hopefully. So the Green Mage is an alternative White Mage, but they also learn a lot of new spells, like buffing spells. They learn spells that increase defense, resist elements. They also gain some new spells like anti-poison to make your party immune to being poisoned, anti-stone to make them immune to being petrified, and you know, that's really it. The audio on the video suddenly got really quiet, but that's probably fine. So, where was I? Alright, the Green Mage. So, that's basically what the Green Mage is. Hang on, feel a sneeze coming on. Much like with a lot of the other mages, really, I feel like the mages have the least that would need to be changed, because so much of what they do comes from their magic and just their stats. And that's what's in the standard game. They do have skills, they do have limit breaks and such, but that's just a far smaller aspect of what makes them unique, as opposed to the new fighter jobs that were added. So the Green Mage I wouldn't really change too much, except I would replace a couple spells with her other abilities. Namely, anti-wind and anti-wind and anti-water. I would remove those spells because I don't know why they exist. To my understanding, there are no wind elemental or water elemental attacks in this game. So, being able to make your characters resist wind or resist water doesn't do anything. Yet she learns an anti-wind spell and an anti-water spell that don't exist in the standard game. So I'll get rid of those. I would remove both of those and instead give her two new spells. One of those spells would be her Exuviation skill. What Exuviation does is basically the Green Mage can use Exuviation to target one of your party members, strip away all of their magical resistances, like resistance to fire, ice, lightning, resistance to poison, resistance to stone, any resistances that they've gained from magic like anti-fire or anti-poison. The Green Mage can strip those off of the character and then perform an attack by hurling that magical energy at the enemy party, hitting all enemies for damage relative to the number of buffs removed. So if you remove one resistance, it'll do a little bit of damage. Remove two resistances, it'll do a little bit more. That's normally a skill that she can just use whenever she wants. And I would make that one of her spells. I'm not sure which level I would put that and how I would rearrange her other spells around doing that, but I would remove either anti-wind or anti-water to give her exuviation as one of her spells instead. And the other useless anti-spell I would remove to give her her limit break as a spell, which is barrier. What that does is it just makes your entire party immune to all status effects. Pretty straightforward, but I'll give her that to do that. Just drop those two completely, to my knowledge, useless elemental resistance spells and give her a couple of her other skills as spells to replace those. Lastly, we're finally on the last of the new job classes. We have the Geomancer. The Geomancer is another spellcaster, but instead of learning spells by buying them or other stuff, he has all of his spells right out of the gate, but which spells can be used depends on what type of terrain you're on. He'll have specific spells for if you're fighting on grass. He'll have specific spells if you're fighting in a forest or in a cave or in a volcano. And he has 4 spells that he can cast, 1 level 1, 1 level 2, 1 level 3, 1 level 4. And he also has a terrain ability, which casts a random one of those spells, but going back to the resource management issue, the terrain ability, it casts a random spell, yes, but it doesn't cost any magic points, and in fact, every time you use it, it has a random chance of replenishing 1 magic point for every level that the Geomancer has. So you can use that to perpetually get back more magic points when you run out. Granted, he doesn't have very many magic points normally, so you have to use the terrain ability quite often, and when you use that, you're subject to the whims of the randomness to select what spell you're using instead of being able to choose which spell you want yourself. But still, that circumvention of the resource management is a problem for me. So, I would keep the 4 spells. I would also give him his 5th spell, because while you can only manually choose from 4 spells, I noticed that if you use the terrain spell, in addition to being able to randomly cast one of the 4 standard terrain spells that he has access to, there's also a 5th one that can be cast. So for one of their level spells, I would also add that, so you can now freely use that. I would also increase the amount of magic points the Geomancer gets to be more on par with the Black Mage or the White Mage, because normally, to compensate for being able to replenish magic points, the Geomancer doesn't get very many magic points. But we're removing the magic point replenishment for the most part, so we need to increase his magic points to compensate. That's only 5 levels of magic, though. The standard 4, and then 1 more for the terrain spell that can normally only be accessed at random by using the terrain skill. So I was thinking, what would we fill those other 3 slots with? One of them I was thinking was terrain. You would lose the random magic point regeneration, though. No more of that. And I would put that probably at level 4 or 5, and just bump up whatever spell is normally at that level, and just give him terrain, which would be able to randomly cast any of his other terrain spells, maybe only from levels 1 through 5, or 1 through 6, or whatever it would be, though. That way, the terrain skill can't randomly cast his more powerful stuff that I would put at the higher levels. So that's 6. The 5 attack spells and then terrain, which would randomly cast one of those 5. Then, for level 7, I would probably give the Geomancer his Limit Break, which is Geostorm, which is a super powerful attack that hits all enemies, and it automatically does weakness damage. So if an enemy is weak to lightning, it hits them for lightning. If an enemy is weak to fire, it hits them for fire. I would give that, instead of being a Limit Break, I would give that as his level 7 spell. Real quick, switch to the game. We're at Matoya's. We're returning her crystal so she can see, and in exchange, she gives us the herb, which we can take to the Prince of Elfland to wake him up. And then we can talk to her again if she doesn't say anything. So that's what's going on in the game right now. Back to the Geomancer though, so I would consider sort of retaining his MP regeneration. Maybe for his level 8 spell, give him a spell that just... I don't know what we would call it, but just have his level 8 spell be a spell that replenishes 1 magic point for all of his levels 1 through 7. Or maybe just 1 through 6 if that would be too powerful in combination with Geostorm. And aside from that, I would keep the Geomancer pretty much the same, aside from, again, the mandatory removal of passives, world abilities, and all that stuff. I would also keep his bell weapons, which, when equipped, increase specific elements. Like he has a water bell that makes water spells do more damage, a fire bell that makes fire bells do more damage. I would obviously keep those, so he would have some customization and weapon options that you could switch between based on what type of spells you have access to in any given area. And there you have it. There's my conversion of all 10 of the Renaissance jobs to quickly go back over them and summarize. The Evoker, I have no thoughts. If you have any thoughts, let me know, because I haven't seen the Evoker, so I can't provide any thoughts in regards to that. Time Mage, I would keep the same. Lancer, I would consider giving Jump and Super Jump as spells, and make his lance weapons weaker but with higher hit percentage than swords. The Trainer, I would make an average fighter. Solid luck for a second best runner if you don't quite want a thief, but you still want reliable escaping abilities, and give him his whip weapons that would be fairly weak, but would be able to inflict status effects in addition to damage whenever he attacks. The Dark Knight, super strong, but super inaccurate with his basic attacks, while having some utility spells like Sleep and being able to poison enemies or drain hit points from them to replenish himself. The Bard, being able to attack all enemies with his harp, and learning unique song magic exclusive to himself, but having standard magic points instead of being able to use his spells infinitely. The Dancer, same sort of deal, but without harps, obviously. She uses knives for her weapons. But the same sort of deal with her dances, just give her standard magic points instead of her bravery system. Blue Mage, keep exactly the same. Green Mage, keep exactly the same, except for replacing the useless anti-wind and anti-water spells with Exuviation and Barrier. And then the Geomancer, ditch the terrain ability, so he can't replenish his magic points so much, obviously. Add some of his abilities like terrain and Geoblast or whatever to his spells, and increase the amount of magic points he has in order to compensate for the fact that he can no longer infinitely replenish his own magic points. So, there we go! If you have any thoughts on that, let me know, and I'll see you next time.